Don't do it, he's lying. The words were barely louder than a whisper, but in that silent laboratory, they landed like a shockwave that no one was prepared for. Just seconds earlier, the room had been filled with the low hum of machines and the quiet shuffle of lab coats as a group of scientists stood behind reinforced glass, reviewing the final checklist on a tablet. The subject inside the enclosure, a full-grown gorilla named Koba, sat unnaturally still on the concrete floor, his dark eyes fixed on nothing in particular, or so they thought. To them, he was just another failed experiment, a project that had consumed nearly 4 years of funding and sleepless nights, only to produce results that fell far below expectations. Koba had never demonstrated the advanced cognitive breakthroughs they were hoping for. No complex communication, no sign of abstract reasoning, just basic pattern recognition and occasional mimicry that could easily be explained away. That's what the report said. That's what Dr. Michael Carter had signed off on just 20 minutes ago. Standing at 6 feet tall and weighing over 400 pounds, Koba was physically impressive, but in the eyes of the program, he had become obsolete. The decision had already been made. The project would be shut down, and Koba would be transferred out by the end of the day. It was routine. It was procedural. It was supposed to be easy. Emily Watson stood slightly apart from the others, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her gaze never leaving the animal. She had spent more time observing Koba than anyone else in the facility. She knew his habits, the way he tilted his head when he heard a new sound, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the floor when he was thinking. Something about today felt off, but she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Koba hadn't moved for nearly 5 minutes. Or maybe it was the feeling, subtle but persistent, that he was listening. Then it happened. Without warning, Koba slowly lifted his head. His eyes shifted, locking directly onto the observation window. Not scanning, not drifting, locked, intentional. And then, in a voice that didn't belong in that room, a voice that was rough but unmistakably human, he spoke. Don't do it, he's lying. The tablet slipped from one of the technicians' hands, clattering loudly against the floor, but no one reacted. No one breathed. Dr. Carter froze mid-step, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard, searching desperately for a logical explanation, audio interference, a playback glitch, anything. But there was nothing. No speakers, no recordings, just Koba, still seated, still staring, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Emily felt her heart begin to race, a cold sensation spreading through her chest as the weight of those words settled in. He wasn't mimicking. He wasn't repeating. He had chosen those words. And somehow, impossibly, he had directed them. At them. Or worse, at someone specific. No one moved for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was only a few seconds, stretched thin by disbelief and the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound too loud. Dr. Michael Carter slowly turned his head toward the control panel, his fingers hovering just inches above the emergency audio override, as if touching it might somehow confirm what had just happened. His mind refused to settle on a single explanation. There were protocols for everything in this lab, layers of redundancy designed to eliminate error, and yet nothing in those protocols accounted for this. Koba remained seated in the center of the enclosure, his posture unchanged, but there was something different now, something impossible to ignore. He was not just present, he was aware. Emily took a cautious step closer to the glass, her breath shallow, her eyes locked on Koba's face. She had spent hundreds of hours observing him through that same window, documenting every small behavior, every subtle reaction. She had seen curiosity, frustration, even what she once described in her notes as a form of quiet contentment. But she had never seen this. This was intention. Did anyone trigger a playback? Michael asked, his voice low but steady, though it carried a strain that everyone in the room could hear. A technician shook his head quickly, already pulling up system logs on a nearby monitor. No external audio input. No recorded phrases loaded. There is nothing in the system that matches that output. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than they should have been. Emily pressed her palm lightly against the glass, not touching it fully, as if she was unsure whether the barrier between them was still enough. Koba's gaze shifted slightly, following the movement, and for a brief moment, it felt like he was studying her. Not reacting. Studying. Koba, she said softly, testing the sound of her own voice, uncertain if she even wanted a response. The room tensed instantly. No one interrupted her, but I turned toward the enclosure. Koba blinked slowly, his head tilting just a few degrees, the same way he always did when he was processing something unfamiliar. But this time, it did not feel like confusion. It felt like recognition. Dr. Carter stepped forward, regaining just enough composure to assert control. Emily stepped back. "We do not know what we are dealing with." His words were measured, but they carried urgency now, a quiet edge that had not been there before. Emily hesitated, then lowered her hand, though she did not move away. Her instincts were pulling her in two directions at once. One part of her wanted to follow protocol, to treat this as an anomaly, a potential risk. But the other part, the part that had been observing Koba for years, was telling her something else entirely. This was not random. This was not an accident. Koba shifted his weight slightly, the movement slow and deliberate, his massive hands resting flat against the floor. The subtle tap of his fingers echoed faintly in the enclosure, a rhythm Emily recognized immediately. He did that when he was thinking, when he was trying to solve something. Michael noticed it too, his expression tightening as realization began to creep in. "He is responding," Emily whispered, almost to herself. "He understands us." Michael did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on Koba, searching for anything that could disprove what was becoming harder to deny. Then, almost instinctively, he spoke, his voice directed clearly toward the enclosure. "Koba, who is lying?" The question lingered in the air, fragile and dangerous at the same time, as if asking it had crossed a line none of them were prepared to face. For a moment, nothing happened. The lab remained silent, the machines humming softly in the background. Then Koba's eyes shifted again, not toward the group this time, but slightly to the left, toward Dr. Carter himself. And in that instant, Emily felt something in her chest tighten, because deep down, before a single word was spoken, she already knew the answer was not going to be what any of them wanted to hear. Koba did not answer immediately, and that silence felt heavier than anything he could have said. Every person in the room leaned forward without realizing it, their attention locked onto the enclosure as if the next few seconds might rewrite everything they believed about intelligence, about control, about the line they had always assumed separated them from him. Dr. Michael Carter held his breath, his question still hanging in the air, and for the first time in years, he was not certain he wanted an answer. Koba remained still, but his eyes did not waver. They stayed fixed on Michael with a focus that was impossible to misinterpret. It was not random. It was not confusion. It was directed, intentional. A faint sound broke the silence, a soft tapping against the floor. Emily's eyes dropped instantly to Koba's hands, her pulse quickening as she recognized the pattern. He was doing it again, tapping in that steady rhythm he always used when something mattered, when he was concentrating. But this time, there was something different. The pauses between each tap were longer, more deliberate, almost as if he was measuring something in his mind before committing to the next movement. "He is thinking," Emily said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, though everyone heard it. One of the technicians shifted nervously behind her, glancing between the monitors and the enclosure as if searching for a technical explanation that no longer seemed possible. "It could still be mimicry," he offered, though his tone lacked conviction. He might be repeating something he heard before. Emily did not look away from Koba. "Then where did he hear that?" she replied, her question cutting through the room with unsettling clarity. No one answered, because there was no answer, not one that fit within the system they had built. Koba slowly leaned forward, just a few inches, his massive frame shifting with controlled precision. The movement was enough to send a ripple of tension through the room. Dr. Carter instinctively took a step back, though he immediately steadied himself, unwilling to show fear in front of his team. He had spent years leading this project, years believing that everything inside that enclosure was understood, documented, predictable. But now, standing just a few feet from the glass, he could feel that certainty slipping away. "Koba," Michael said again, more firmly this time, as if reinforcing his authority would somehow restore control. "Who is lying?" The question felt sharper now, more direct, and for a moment, it seemed like Koba might not respond at all. His eyes shifted briefly, scanning the room, moving from face to face, lingering for just a fraction of a second on each person. Emily felt her stomach tighten as his gaze passed over her, not with fear, but with something else. Recognition. And then, slowly, his eyes returned to Michael. The tapping stopped. The silence returned. And then Koba spoke again. You know. The words were rough, uneven, but unmistakable. Not a repetition. Not a random sound. A statement. Direct. Accusing. A sharp breath escaped from someone behind Emily, but no one moved. No one dared to interrupt what was unfolding. Michael's face went pale, the color draining just enough for Emily to notice, even in the dim laboratory lighting. That is not possible, he said quickly, almost too quickly, shaking his head as if rejecting the words could undo them. He does not understand context. He cannot form intent like that. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. Emily felt it too. That shift, that fracture in the narrative they had all accepted without question. Koba's gaze did not leave Michael. He did not move, did not gesture, did not repeat himself. He simply watched, waiting. And in that moment, the balance in the room changed in a way no one could ignore. Because for the first time, it no longer felt like they were observing him. It felt like he was observing them. The room did not recover from those words, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before, pressing down on everyone with a quiet intensity that made it difficult to think clearly. Dr. Michael Carter straightened his posture, forcing a controlled breath as he tried to regain authority over a situation that was slipping beyond anything he had prepared for. This is a misinterpretation, he said, his voice firm but edged with tension. He is responding to tone, to body language. It is a coincidence. But even as he spoke, his eyes did not leave Koba, and there was something unsettled behind them, something that had not been there minutes ago. Emily noticed it immediately. She had worked with Michael long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and control, and what she was seeing now was neither. It was uncertainty, carefully disguised but impossible to hide completely. Koba shifted again, this time turning his head slightly toward the far corner of the enclosure where a small observation camera was mounted high near the ceiling. The movement was subtle, but deliberate enough to draw attention. One of the technicians followed his gaze and instinctively glanced at the monitor feed, as if expecting to see something change, but everything remained the same. The same static angles, the same sterile environment. Nothing unusual. And yet, Koba kept looking there. Why is he doing that? Emily asked softly, more to herself than to anyone else. No one answered, but the question lingered. Because it was not just the movement. It was the intention behind it. Dr. Carter stepped closer to the glass again, this time slower, more cautious, as if he was approaching something unknown rather than observing a controlled subject. Koba, he said, his tone measured, attempting to re-establish a structured interaction. Look at me. For a brief moment, Koba did not respond. His eyes remained fixed on the camera in the corner, unblinking, focused. Then, gradually, he turned back, his gaze settling. Once more on Michael. That same intensity returned, that same unsettling awareness that made it impossible to dismiss what was happening as simple behavior. Emily felt a chill run through her as she watched the exchange. This was no longer observation. This was communication. He is not reacting, she said quietly. He is choosing when to respond. The words hung in the air, and this time, no one tried to argue. Because it was becoming harder to deny. Michael hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly as he considered his next words. The structure of the experiment was gone now, replaced by something unpredictable, something that did not fit into any report or data model. Still, he pressed forward. What do you mean? I know, he asked, his voice lower now, more cautious, as if he was aware that the answer might carry consequences he was not ready to face. Koba blinked once, slowly, and for a moment, it seemed like he might not respond again. The lab remained still, every person waiting, listening, as if even the smallest sound might disrupt whatever fragile connection had formed. Then Koba lifted one hand, his fingers extending slightly before curling inward again, a small, controlled motion that Emily had seen before when he was trying to indicate something specific. But this time, it was different. This time, the gesture was directed. He lowered his hand and shifted his gaze once more, not randomly, but with purpose, moving from Michael to the observation camera and back again. The realization hit Emily first, sharp and immediate. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned slowly toward the monitor. "He is not talking about something random," she said, her voice barely steady. "He is pointing something out." Michael's expression changed instantly, the last trace of controlled certainty slipping away as he followed her gaze toward the screen. And in that moment, the room felt smaller, the air tighter, because whatever Koba was trying to show them, it was not inside the enclosure. It was something they had not been paying attention to, something they thought they already understood. Emily moved first, her instincts overriding protocol as she stepped quickly toward the nearest terminal, her fingers already moving across the keyboard before anyone could stop her. "Pull up the internal feed logs," she said, her voice sharper now, focused, as if something inside her had clicked into place. One of the technicians hesitated for a split second, glancing toward Dr. Carter for confirmation, but Michael did not respond. His eyes remained fixed on the screen ahead, his mind racing to catch up with what was unfolding. "Do it," he said finally, his tone low, controlled, but no longer dismissive. The monitor flickered as the system loaded the recorded feeds, cycling through hours of footage from inside the facility. Everything looked normal at first glance. Routine. Predictable. The same sterile corridors, the same controlled environments. But Emily did not stop there. "Not just this room," she said quickly. "Check the adjacent observation sectors. All of them." The technician nodded, typing faster now, bringing up multiple camera angles side by side. The room filled with the soft hum of processing equipment as the system began sorting through archived footage. Behind the glass, Koba remained still, watching. Not restless, not confused. Watching. His gaze shifted subtly between the monitors and the people in the room, as if he understood exactly what they were doing. Emily leaned closer to the screen, scanning each frame with growing intensity. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a smaller feed in the corner of the display. "Rewind that section." The technician adjusted the timeline, dragging it back by a few minutes. The footage replayed, this time slower. At first, nothing stood out. Just another empty observation area, dimly lit, with equipment lining the walls. But then, something small. A movement. Not inside the enclosure, but near the far edge of the frame, partially obscured by a structural column. "Zoom in," Emily said, her voice tightening. The image enlarged, pixelating slightly, but enough detail remained to make out the shape of a figure. A person, standing just out of the primary camera view, positioned in a way that suggested they did not want to be fully seen. The room went quiet again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. Not disbelief. Awareness. "Who is that?" one of the technicians whispered, leaning closer to the screen. There was no badge visible, no clear identification, just a shadowed outline and a slight movement that confirmed it was not a recording glitch. Dr. Carter stepped forward, his expression hardening as he studied the image. "That sector is restricted," he said slowly. "No one should be there without authorization." Emily felt a chill run through her as she replayed Koba's words in her mind. "Don't do it, he's lying." Her eyes shifted back toward the enclosure, where Koba was now watching her again. Not randomly, directly, as if waiting for her to understand. "Play the audio," she said. The technician hesitated. "There is no audio in that sector," he replied. "It is a visual-only feed." Emily nodded slowly, her thoughts aligning in a way that made her chest tighten. Then how did he know? No one answered. Because there was no system in place that could explain it. No data path. No recorded input. Nothing that connected Koba to that part of the facility. And yet, he had pointed them there. Not by accident. Not by chance. Deliberately. Dr. Carter's jaw tightened as he stared at the screen, his mind working through possibilities he had never considered before. The foundation of everything he believed about the project was beginning to shift, piece by piece. "Track that individual," he said, his voice steady but urgent now. "I want to know who has access to that area and why they were there." The technician nodded, already pulling up access logs and movement records. But as the system began to process the request, Emily could not shake the feeling growing in her chest. This was not just about a person in the wrong place. This was something deeper, something hidden, and somehow, Koba had known about it long before they did. The system logs began to populate line by line across the screen, each entry timestamped down to the second, each access point recorded with precision that had always been considered reliable, unquestionable, absolute. But now, as the data scrolled past, something felt off. Emily leaned closer, her eyes scanning the entries faster than the system could highlight them, her mind connecting fragments before they fully appeared. "Stop," she said suddenly. The technician froze the screen. "Scroll back 3 seconds." The cursor moved, and a specific entry came into focus. Access point, Sector D, 7. Clearance level, Executive Override. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Emily frowned. "Who has Executive Override clearance?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The technician hesitated before replying, his voice quieter now. "Only 2 people in this facility." He glanced briefly at Dr. Carter before looking back at the screen. "You and Director Hayes." The room shifted instantly, the tension sharpening into something far more personal. Dr. Carter did not react immediately, but Emily noticed the subtle tightening in his expression, the way his shoulders squared just slightly, as if bracing against something he had not expected to face. "Pull up Director Hayes' access logs for the last 48 hours, Michael said, his voice controlled, but there was a new edge to it now, something more focused, more urgent. The technician complied, opening a new panel as the system cross-referenced movement data. The results appeared within seconds. No recorded entry into Sector D, 7 at that time. No authorization request. No scheduled activity. According to the system, no one had been there. Emily felt a cold sensation spread through her chest. "That is not possible," she said quietly. "We just saw someone on that feed." The technician nodded, clearly unsettled. "The system shows no authorized access," he repeated. "No badge scan, no biometric confirmation, nothing." Behind them, the faint sound of movement drew their attention back to the enclosure. Koba had shifted again, rising slightly from his seated position, his posture more alert now, his eyes fixed not on the screens this time, but directly on Dr. Carter. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He was watching him, waiting. Emily followed Koba's gaze, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. "He knows," she whispered. Michael turned toward her sharply. "Knows what?" Emily hesitated, her thoughts racing, the pieces aligning in a way that felt both impossible and undeniable. "He was not just pointing at the camera," she said slowly. "He was pointing at something the camera showed us, something we were not supposed to see." The words settled heavily in the room. Michael's expression hardened, but there was no dismissal this time, no immediate rejection. Only calculation. Only the quiet realization that whatever this was, it was bigger than a behavioral anomaly. He turned back to the screen, replaying the footage in his mind, the figure in the shadows, the missing access logs, the words Koba had spoken. "Don't do it, he's lying." His jaw tightened. "Run a deeper audit," he said. "Manual override. I want every access point in that sector cross-checked against internal surveillance, not just system logs." The technician nodded quickly, initiating the command. As the system began processing again, Emily felt a growing certainty settle in her chest, heavy and unavoidable. This was not a malfunction. This was not coincidence. Koba had not guessed. He had known. And somehow, without ever leaving that enclosure, without access to any system or feed, he had revealed something that the entire facility had failed to detect. Her eyes slowly returned to him, and this time, when their gazes met, there was no doubt left in her mind. Koba was not trying to scare them. He was trying to warn them. And whatever truth he was pointing toward, it was still hidden, waiting just beneath the surface, closer than any of them realized. The deeper audit took longer than expected, each passing second stretching the tension tighter across the room as the system sifted through layers of restricted data that were rarely accessed, let alone questioned. Emily stood motionless beside the terminal, her eyes fixed on the loading bar as if willing it to move faster, while Dr. Michael Carter paced slowly behind her, his usual composure replaced by a restless energy that no one had ever seen from him before. The hum of the machine seemed louder now, filling the silence with a constant reminder that something beneath their control was unfolding. "It should not take this long," one of the technicians muttered under his breath, glancing nervously at the screen. "These records are not that deep." Emily did not respond, but she felt it too. The delay was not normal. It was as if the system itself was resisting, as if something within it was being forced open rather than accessed through standard pathways. Then suddenly, the screen flickered, and a new set of files appeared, flagged with restricted access markers that had never been visible before. "What is that?" Emily asked, her voice barely steady. The technician hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "These files, they are not listed in the primary directory," he said slowly. "They are hidden behind a secondary encryption layer." Dr. Carter stepped closer, his expression tightening as he read the labels. "Open them," he said. The technician glanced at him. "Sir, this requires executive-level authorization." Michael did not hesitate. "You have it." The command was entered, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the first file opened. The room fell silent as the contents loaded onto the screen. It was not just data. It was footage. Multiple recordings, time-stamped, organized, but never disclosed in any official report. Emily leaned in, her heart pounding as the first clip began to play. The image showed a different enclosure, similar in design, but smaller, dimmer, less maintained. Inside, another subject. Another animal. Not Koba. The behavior was different too. Slower. Less responsive. The clip ended abruptly, replaced by another, and then another, each one showing variations of the same controlled environment, the same type of observation, but none of it had ever been mentioned in any of the documentation they had worked with. "These are not part of the approved trials," Emily whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "They were never logged." Dr. Carter said nothing, but his face had gone pale again, the realization settling in piece by piece as he watched the sequence unfold. This was not an isolated anomaly. This was a pattern, a hidden layer of experimentation that had been deliberately concealed. Emily's mind raced as she connected it back to Koba, to his words, to the way he had pointed toward that camera. "He knew," she said, louder this time. "He knew about this." One of the technicians shook his head slowly. "That is not possible. There is no way he could access this information." But even as he spoke, the certainty behind his words had vanished, because nothing about this situation followed the rules anymore. Behind the glass, Koba remained standing now, his posture steady, his eyes focused directly on the group. There was no confusion in his expression, no agitation, only a quiet intensity, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Emily turned toward him, her chest tightening as a new realization began to form. "He was not just warning us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was trying to show us the truth." Dr. Carter slowly turned to face Koba, the weight of everything pressing down on him at once. The project, the data, the decisions he had made, the assumptions he had trusted without question. And now, standing there, confronted with evidence he had never seen before, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Doubt. Real, undeniable doubt. Koba took a single step forward inside the enclosure, closing a small distance between himself and the glass, his eyes never leaving Michael's. And in that moment, without speaking another word, the message was clear. This was not about what Koba had learned. It was about what they had refused to see. The room felt different now, as if the air itself had shifted under the weight of what they had uncovered. And for the first time since the project began, no one seemed certain of their role anymore. The monitors continued to display the hidden recordings, each clip adding another layer to a reality that none of them had agreed to be part of, yet all of them had unknowingly supported. Emily stood frozen in place, her eyes scanning the footage as if searching for something that could still make sense of it, something that could justify the gap between what they were told and what was actually happening. But there was nothing, only more questions. Dr. Michael Carter slowly reached out and paused the screen, the final frame locking into place, showing another enclosure, another subject, another controlled environment that had never been disclosed. His hand lingered on the console, unmoving, as if letting go might mean accepting what this truly meant. "How long?" he began, but his voice faltered, the question unfinished because he was not sure he wanted the answer. One of the technicians swallowed hard before responding. "Based on the timestamps, these files go back at least 3 years." Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, the numbers settling in with quiet devastation. 3 years. That meant everything they had been working on, every report, every conclusion, had been built on incomplete information. Or worse, manipulated information. She opened her eyes again and turned slowly toward Koba. He had not moved closer, but his presence felt stronger now, more grounded, as if the distance between them no longer mattered. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering, and in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not confusion, understanding. "You were trying to tell us," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. "This whole time, you were trying to show us." Koba blinked once, slowly, the same deliberate motion she had seen countless times before, but now it carried a different meaning. It was not just a reaction. It felt like acknowledgement. Behind her, Dr. Carter exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with realization. He had spent years believing he was leading a transparent, ethical study, one that pushed boundaries but remained within them. But now, looking at the evidence on the screen and the silent figure behind the glass, he could no longer hold on to that belief. "Director Hayes," he said quietly, almost to himself, the name carrying a weight that had not been there before. Emily turned back toward the monitor, her thoughts racing again. "If he authorized this level of access, then he knew," she said. "He knew about all of it." The room fell silent once more, but this time, it was not confusion that filled it. It was something heavier. Responsibility. One of the technicians shifted uneasily. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice uncertain. The question lingered, unanswered, because the answer was not simple. It was not procedural. It was not written in any manual. Dr. Carter remained still for a moment longer, then slowly straightened his posture, a different kind of resolve settling into his expression. Not the confidence he had shown before, but something quieter, something earned. He turned away from the screen and faced the enclosure fully, meeting Koba's gaze without hesitation. "We stop pretending we do not see this," he said, his voice steady now, though softer than before. Emily felt a tightness in her chest ease slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of direction. For the first time since everything began unraveling, there was a path forward, even if it was uncertain. She stepped closer to the glass again, her reflection faintly visible beside Koba's silhouette. "We are going to figure this out," she said, more to him than to anyone else. Koba remained silent, but his eyes did not waver, and that silence spoke louder than anything he had said before. Because now they understood. This was never about proving that he could speak. It was about whether they were willing to listen. No one spoke for a long moment after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be understood had already settled into place, heavy and undeniable. The monitors still glowed behind them, frozen on fragments of a hidden truth that could no longer be ignored. But for Dr. Michael Carter, the screens were no longer the focus. His attention remained on Koba, standing just a few feet beyond the glass, calm, steady, and impossibly aware. The distance between them had not changed, but everything else had. Michael took a slow step forward, stopping just short of the barrier, his reflection faintly visible beside Koba's. For years, he had stood in that exact spot, observing, measuring, analyzing. But this time was different. This time, he was not looking at a subject. He was looking at a witness. "I thought I understood what we were doing here," he said quietly, his voice no longer carrying authority, only honesty. "I thought we were learning." The words lingered, not directed at anyone else in the room, but spoken into the space between them. Koba did not respond, but his gaze remained fixed, unbroken, as if he was listening in a way that went beyond language. Emily stood just behind Michael, her eyes moving between him and Koba, feeling the shift not just in the room, but in everything they had believed about this place. The project had started with curiosity, with ambition, with the idea that intelligence could be measured, categorized, controlled. But now, standing here, it was clear that something far more important had been overlooked. Not intelligence, understanding. One of the technicians quietly shut down one of the monitors, then another, until the room grew dimmer, the artificial glow fading into something softer, more grounded. The constant hum of the system seemed less overwhelming now, as if the urgency had passed, replaced by something quieter but far more significant. Dr. Carter placed his hand gently against the glass, not as a test, not as an experiment, but as a simple gesture. On the other side, Koba watched the movement, then slowly lifted his own hand, stopping just short of the barrier, mirroring the position without touching it. The space between them remained, clear and unbroken, but the connection no longer depended on closing it. Emily felt her breath catch slightly as she watched, not because of what was happening, but because of what it meant. There were no instruments measuring this, no data capturing it, and yet, it was the most real moment any of them had experienced inside that lab. "We were wrong," she said softly, the words carrying a quiet certainty that no one challenged. "Not about everything, but about enough." Dr. Carter nodded slowly, his eyes still on Koba. "Not about what he can do," he replied. "About what we chose not to see." The truth settled over them, not as a shock anymore, but as something steady, something that would not disappear when